The dangers of cold weather is hypothermia, or subnormal body temperature. On After 8 this morning, we're about to find out that people not only die from it, but in some cases they are saved by it. More than 600 Americans died as a result of the recent severe winter weather, and hundreds more almost died. This father plunged through the ice of Lake Michigan, trying to rescue his 4-year-old son who had fallen off a sled. The WGN television crew who shot these scenes pitched in and helped rescue the father, but it took scuba-equipped firefighters nearly a half hour to find little James Tontlovich. At first, it was assumed the child had drowned. Miraculously, he was revived and is now recovering in Chicago's Children's Hospital. Doctors say the fact that he lived can be attributed to the effects of hypothermia, low body temperature. While hypothermia and its effects are more often less dramatic, they can be very unhealthy. The heat was shut off in more than 1 million homes this winter. The result? Chronic hypothermia, a condition in which the body temperature is continually below normal.
The effects of a body temperature between 90 and 96 degrees, what we would call mild hypothermia, are chronic confusion, stumbling, inability to perform daily tasks. In the elderly, the worst problem is that these signs are simply written off as being senility, which is totally inappropriate.
Until recently, most body temperature studies concerned overheating, fever. But new research is now underway in what seems an appropriately chilly location, Duluth, Minnesota. The University of Minnesota Medical School operates a hypothermia lab there.
How are your fingers? They're cold. They're getting cold.
Researchers are studying so-called shiver response. If you thought shivering was just your body telling you it's cold, you're wrong.
The reason the body shivers is to try and generate heat. Now that heat is used to warm the blood that's coursing through your body. At first you can stop it, but as the cold continues, you will be at a state of what they call uncontrollable shivering.
They are also studying something called the dive reflex at the Duluth lab. In some animals, such as ducks, seals, and whales, the dive reflex helps them survive long dives. It's not nearly as well developed in adult humans, but there are some indications of a slowdown of the heart and conservation of oxygenated blood for the brain. Was it this primitive dive reflex that saved the life of the Tontlovich child? No one knows for sure. What is certain is that the child's lower body temperature, 85 degrees, and quick, careful work by the paramedics contributed greatly to his survival. That little boy is now in fair condition. He does suffer some brain damage, but it may be reversible. He's able to walk without any help, and he's able to say a few words. He's working with the speech and physical therapist. With us now, Dr. Paul Auerbach. He's an emergency physician at San Francisco General Hospital and author of the book, Management of Wilderness and Environmental Emergencies. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
How did that little boy survive?
He survived in a combination of ways. Probably was protected by being so cold, and may have been affected by what's called the mammalian diving reflex, where when he fell in the water, his heart rate slowed down and blood was shunted from places that he really didn't need it, like his arms and legs, to his heart and his brain.
That's an incredible phenomenon, isn't it?
Fortunate in his case.
Yes. Was it the fast treatment that helped as well?
Not so much that he had fast treatment, but that he had appropriate treatment. There's nothing that anyone needs to do in a hurry for someone who has hypothermia, but they need to be very careful not to do the wrong thing when they come upon someone who is cold.
Well, what is the right thing?
The right thing is to suspect it, first of all. If you come on someone who may be suffering from hypothermia, who may be unconscious, it's to not agitate that person, to not make them transfer cold blood from their arms and their legs back to their heart and lungs, where it may make them get even colder.
Didn't they put him in a coma for a short period of time?
After he was resuscitated in the field by the paramedics, then the question was how much brain damage he might have suffered from having no oxygen to his brain for a period of time, and ways to protect people who have had that are to once again make them cold and to put them in controlled comas with drugs.
Now, there are a lot of people who live in cold areas. Is it fairly common to have hypothermia and not know it?
For instance, in San Francisco, which is generally appreciated to be a warm climate, we see a lot of people who have hypothermia even in the summer. And that happens because people can't pay their heating bills and their heat is low. They may be elderly and on drugs that cause them to be hypothermic. or they may be under the influence of a variety of drugs, the most common being alcohol.
What should they do then?
The people who are hypothermic need to be warmed. It's generally a sociologic problem more than a medical problem.
But I mean, how, is it a slow process of warming, as you indicated before?
People who are only mildly hypothermic, people who aren't colder than 90 to 94 degrees, can be rewarmed relatively rapidly. But people who are dramatically hypothermic, where it is an immediate life threat, like the little boy who fell through the ice, need to be rewarmed slowly and carefully.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Paul Auerbach, for your information. We appreciate it. We'll be back in a moment, but first, this is Today on NBC.
Place where shoppers from every place get more for their money.
Not Kiok Bell's Factory Outlet Mall?
Family Feud will not be seen tonight. In order that we may bring you the following program, stay tuned for A Closer Look, Dead or Alive, on KMOX TV St. Louis, Channel 4.
January 15th, 1984. Rescue workers crowd a section of the Lake Michigan shore. A sledding accident has left a man and his son trapped in the freezing water. The 4-year-old boy has slipped beneath the surface. 15 minutes go by. After several attempts, firemen hoist the man up the snow-covered embankment. His son remains underwater. Divers arrive on the scene. Time after time, they resurface after combing the icy lake. Nothing. Finally, the boy's body is recovered. After being submerged for more than 20 minutes, Jimmy Tontowitz is thrust into the hands of waiting paramedics.
What did he look like when he came out of the water?
He was cyanotic and ashen. He was very limp, lifeless looking. No pulse, no respirations.
Did he look dead?
He was very much dead. He looked it and he was.
If you pronounce those people dead or did nothing and they died, there wouldn't be anybody who would second guess that. I'm second guessing that now.
I would not be surprised that maybe as high as 20 to 25% of the people declared dead from drowning could be resuscitated. I think there's a tremendous percentage of people who are given up for dead far too soon.
This is Jimmy Tontowitz today. Months after his accident, he is alive and well. What saved Jimmy's life? Why did the paramedics try to resuscitate someone who was clinically dead? How can you tell if someone who looks dead is really dead or alive?
With Robert Jordan.
Good evening. A 4-year-old boy and his father are alive tonight following a dramatic rescue from the icy waters of Lake Michigan.
The rescue of Jimmy Tontowitz defied time-honored medical assumptions. Doctors, medical books, and life-saving manuals have long stated that if a drowning victim is underwater for 4 minutes, the lack of oxygen is likely to result in irreversible brain damage. After 6 minutes, they say, the victim dies. But Jimmy Tontowitz was underwater for 20 minutes. 20 minutes without a breath. Jimmy's survival seemed so inconceivable, the media was anxious to retell his story. The videotape of his rescue was replayed on network television. The millions who saw it reacted much like those who witnessed the event. Most believed they had seen a miracle.
A hospital spokesman said it is a miracle that the boy is alive, and we agree.
It is indeed a miracle.
Somehow it's always a miracle to the uninitiated.
Long before Jimmy Tontowitz, this man, Dr. Martin Nemiroff, offered a scientific explanation for the so-called miracle of drowning victims coming back to life.
I had a series of cases that survived that I didn't expect to survive. Long submersions, particularly in cold water. And the long submersions, I mean submersions greater than 6 minutes, which were formerly thought to be routinely fatal or leading to permanent brain damage.
In 1977, when Nemiroff was an internist and professor at the University of Michigan, he published a report based on 15 of his case studies. His findings? Cold water seems to suspend the 4 to 6 minute rule. In humans, the cold apparently triggers the same reflex that lets seals, whales, and other mammals remain underwater for long periods of time. That response is called the mammalian diving reflex. Basically, it works this way. Cold water on the face causes a reaction that slows the heartbeat and directs the blood flow away from extremities to vital organs. The oxygen that remains in the bloodstream protects the heart, lungs, and brain. Nemiroff says victims submerged less than 1 hour have a chance to survive if they are properly resuscitated and rewarmed. But as seen in the Jimmy Tontowitz case, there is a dangerous paradox to the mammalian diving reflex. The cold water that activates the life-saving reflex also turns the skin blue, makes a pulse undetectable, and initiates all the clinical signs of death. Nemiroff's research shows some apparent drowning victims look dead, but they are not dead. They're hypothermic. That means they're cold.
If you pronounced those people dead or did nothing and they died, there wouldn't be anybody who would second guess that. I'm second guessing that now.
March 28, 1975, a car driven by 18-year-old Brian Cunningham plunged into this man-made pond in Jackson, Michigan. 38 minutes later, rescuers pulled Cunningham's body from the frigid water. His body was blue, his pupils fixed and dilated. He had no pulse. Brian Cunningham was declared dead. But as rescuers were strapping his body onto a stretcher, Cunningham belched. That involuntary reaction convinced rescuers to start immediate resuscitation.
One of the people on the scene, the director of emergency services, happened to be a doctor who had talked with Dr. Marty Nemiroff just a week before my accident, which was quite lucky. He immediately did everything within his power to keep me alive until Dr. Nemiroff could get here from University of Michigan Hospital.
In 1975, Nemiroff was looking for cases to confirm his cold water near drowning theory. Cunningham, now a TV repairman, became his most celebrated and controversial case. Cunningham's parents refused to give up hope. They gave Nemiroff permission to try anything to save their son. With full CPR in progress, Nemiroff rushed Cunningham 45 miles to the University of Michigan Hospital, where resuscitation efforts were continued.
Oh, of course, everyone at the emergency room here, and also most of the staff personnel at University Hospital, everyone was just aghast. They couldn't figure out why these doctors were bringing me in. They said they felt that it was pointless. There wasn't any real reason to attempt to revive me, because even if I did live at some marginal level, I'd never be anything more than a vegetable.
After 2 hours of CPR and 13 hours on a respirator, Cunningham regained consciousness. He suffered no ill effects from the accident, no permanent brain damage.
You were the first case that really did this well, that everyone recorded and looked at carefully. What was the media attention like back in '75?
Oh, I get calls from everybody. The New York Times, the Chicago Sun, Newsweek, Barbara Walters called me and wanted me to be on the Today Show. Everybody called, and I just wasn't prepared to deal with that then.
Cunningham's story and Nemiroff's research soon became old news. Nemiroff says when the initial interest died down, what was left was a hesitant medical community.
A lot of what I'm saying is not straight down the line accepted medicine. This is an area it's controversial, and not everybody agrees.
So what might persuade a reluctant rescuer to try to resuscitate a member of your family? Nemiroff says it's the fear that you may file suit and take your complaint to court.
Nemiroff says he has provided expert testimony in 20 lawsuits. He says he is aware that his research puts a greater burden of responsibility on emergency medical personnel. This is how one 1977 medical journal reacted to that responsibility. Quote, "Another headache for those of us who pronounce people dead. During drowning resuscitations, there are bound to be some kibitzers at the water's edge to remind you about the diving reflex or to sue you for forgetting about it.
If the public demands of you to resuscitate people, the physicians feel the legal pressure to attempt it. And it's not beneath me to goad the medical profession by using the public and the potential for litigation.
4 years ago, Nemiroff left the mainstream of medicine. He joined the Coast Guard and requested to be stationed here in Kodiak, Alaska. While the medical establishment sometimes ignored Nemiroff's findings, the Coast Guard often embraced his work.
Found a much higher professional standard and ethical standard in the Coast Guard.
As flight surgeon on a helicopter rescue team, Nemiroff has had a greater chance to document more near-drowning cases. But one case stands out.
The last child that I rescued was a three-year-old who was recovered wearing a blanket sleeper out of icy Alaska seas and brought aboard the helicopter. And my first impression is this child is dead. She was in the water for 70 minutes and submerged most of that time, or at least a lot of that time, closer to 60 minutes.
3-year-old Misty Dawn Densmore completely recovered. Nemiroff attributes that to her age. Like most drowning victims who survive, Misty Dawn was young, she was submerged in very cold water less than 70 degrees, and she received immediate and aggressive CPR. What makes her case unique is the length of time she was underwater. The shorter the time a victim is submerged, the less chance for brain damage, the greater chance for survival. But Misty Dawn was underwater for 60 minutes. She is Nemiroff's longest recorded case.
It reminds the person that these cases aren't routine deaths, and to think or rethink what the circumstances are and where resuscitation might still even be appropriate.
60 minutes underwater, 38 minutes submerged, 20 minutes without a breath. Since his research began, Nemiroff has studied hundreds of these cold water cases, and he is personally responsible for the complete recovery of 40 near-drowning victims. Yet, these cases are often called miracles. After a decade of documentation, does the miracle label still prevent some rescuers from trying to resuscitate, or give them an excuse to abandon their efforts too soon?
My resuscitations take 2 and 3 hours. They may span 1 or 2 cities. And we are way over on one side of the line in terms of aggressiveness.
He was trying to serve a public purpose, to say, hey, we're giving up too soon. Let's take our time. Let's look at these things again.
Since 1977, David Smith has been spreading the gospel according to Nemiroff. Back then, Smith was a Coast Guard commander. Now retired, Smith is a self-employed water safety expert. He still travels the country and teaches seminars like this one in St. Louis.
Drowning is the second leading cause of accidental death in the United States up to age 44. It's the third overall leading cause of death for all ages.
Most of Smith's students are emergency medical technicians and paramedics. He believes if the people on the scene knew the chances of surviving cold water immersions, hundreds, maybe thousands of lives could be saved each year.
People underwater for long periods of time may not be dead, but they look dead. They will have no signs of life whatsoever. None. Zero zilch. In many of these cases, the persons coming on scene believe the person is dead before they ever get there. For a number of reasons. That's what they've been taught. That's what they expect. That's what's in the books. So even though they may have a viable person in front of them, that's not what they see, and that's not what they expect. And unfortunately, that's what the outcome is. We've got to develop a way of looking for the unexpected. How many people do we bury who aren't dead? I tell you, it's scary. It is really scary.
7,000 people die from drowning in the United States each year. Last year, 140 of those deaths occurred in Missouri. Surprisingly, about half of all drownings happen in the colder months of the year, in cold water. David Smith believes that with more vigorous resuscitation efforts, many of those lives could be saved.
I would not be surprised that maybe as high as 20 to 25% of the people declared dead from drowning could be resuscitated. I think there's a tremendous percentage of people who are given up for dead far too soon.
Seeing is believing. The chance filming of the dramatic rescue of a young Chicago boy let the public see what Nemiroff and Smith have been saying. Some drowning cases are survivable. What did he look like when he came out of the water?
He was cyanotic and ashen. He was very limp, lifeless looking. No pulse, no respirations.
Did he look dead?
He was very much dead. He looked it, and he was.
Why would you try to resuscitate someone who looked and was dead?
Because of the training that we've been through and the continuing education.
The Chicago paramedics who rescued Jimmy Tontowitz have all been trained in cold water resuscitation techniques. They say more and more emergency medical personnel in the northern cold climate states are learning these standard procedures. What are they taught? For any victim submerged in cold water less than 1 hour, begin standard CPR as soon as the victim is removed from the water. Then head to the nearest emergency room. Don't stop CPR until the victim is rewarmed. Be aware that some resuscitations take hours.
Due to the national publicity received by the Jimmy Tontowitz story, the medical community's become much more interested, and we find that a lot of people across the country are now wanting to know what it was that we did right here in Chicago.
Missouri's got to be one of the most backward states in the Union as far as progressive concepts of EMS.
Other EMTs and paramedics, how much do they know? Do they know as much as you do after today?
No, not unless they've taken the class.
How many have to take the class?
This isn't a mandatory course. I mean, I just took my state boards.
Was there anything on the board test about cold water?
No.
Nothing?
No.
It's just lack of communication of knowledge, you know, and that's what he's doing. He's starting out at our level because we're going to start these techniques.
Now I'm going to wave my hand at you. That makes you all fellow heretics. And the idea is, what we're going to share today, don't sit on it, okay? Tell people about it.
In the last 5 years, Smith has taught more than 25,000 people about the mammalian diving reflex. And this year, for the first time, the Red Cross has included the information in its manual. Smith says the awareness among Missouri's EMTs is growing. He's not as sure about our doctors.
It may be true that a lot of emergency room physicians are not totally aware of what the diving reflex is. But I think that the majority of emergency room physicians know they're told a basic rule, and that is that you have prolonged resuscitative efforts with near-drowning victims.
But would they resuscitate long enough? Dr. Lawrence Lewis, the director of the emergency room at St. Louis University Hospitals, says yes. The EMTs aren't so sure.
If we walk up to a doctor and say, I think this guy has a chance, or I think this person has a chance, and he'll look at you like, you're crazy, lady.
Well, he's a doctor, and you're just a, quote, paramedic or EMT. What do you know?
It's a constant, everyday battle with the physicians. Sometimes it is just totally ridiculous. They have no concept of the emergency care that was provided at the scene.
But they're fairly weighty charges. I mean, are you basically saying that they are negligent or ignorant?
Ignorant.
Ignorant.
They're not negligent, they don't understand.
No.
They have such time demands made on them, you know, from everything when they're students and when they're going to the ER.
I'm not going to indict the EMTPs because they do the best they can in a very, very adverse situation. And I'm sure that they feel that when they bring somebody in, that unless the ball is carried all the way, that it was dropped by the physician. But there are a lot of other decisions that are made prior to incurring really a big expense in time, effort, and money on an individual. We have it as a standard operating procedure that we will do resuscitation on anyone who's brought here, even if they are brought here and it looks like they died yesterday.
Again, it's the quality of care. And if the folks in the emergency chain know what they're doing.
Smith believes it's time to push emergency rescue efforts even further. Time to look past cold water near drowning cases to all accidents involving hypothermia.
All the signs of death are indistinguishable from the signs of hypothermia, profound hypothermia. They're all the same. What we've learned, and that which cannot be denied about people being revived who should be dead in the water, is only picking up the end of the blanket and peeking underneath. I truly believe that there are many more people given up for dead prematurely out of the water than in the water. And I'm going to show you some corpses that are going to wake up on autopsy tables. And again, I think we deal with hypothermia much, much more than we think. Here we have 2 doctors and 10 police officers wandering around this lady's apartment trying to figure out who or what killed her. She's found dead in her apartment. She has to be dead, no signs of life. Well, they can't ascertain who or what killed her, so they take her to the morgue, and they're going to do an autopsy. They put her on the autopsy table. The pathologist is about ready to begin, and all of a sudden they notice something very unusual. Her throat is quivering. She's alive, viable, got no problems at all. Now, what had happened? She lost consciousness. She was in a bar. She'd been dropping some barbiturates before she went to the bar. Now look what some of the physicians say here. A miracle. Fluke. Here's a detective says, I'm telling you I've seen dead people 100 times. No! You've seen people you thought were dead 100 times. This is not an isolated incident. It happens all the time. So it has nothing to do with the water, except the protective mechanisms in your body are roughly the same.
Drugs, alcohol, exposure to any cold environment. These situations can make a victim hypothermic, can make a victim look dead. But like cold water near drownings, the slower metabolism may keep a victim alive and make resuscitation possible. Smith recommends rescuers look twice at seemingly routine deaths, such as drunken drivers found in winter automobile accidents and elderly victims found in homes they can't afford to heat.
Is the person dead? No, they're cold.
Any guesses on how many people have been pronounced dead that really are just cold?
Thousands.
That many?
Oh, through the years, absolutely.
Listen, I'm on the street and I got Dr. Weddick with me.
Dr. George Weddick is the medical director of St. Louis City Hospital's emergency services. He says he sometimes rides with the ambulance crews to keep up on emergency care in the field. Like David Smith, Weddick is concerned that some people who are cold are mistaken for dead.
She felt cold. Yeah, she's cold.
Even on this warm summer day, Weddick encountered a case of hypothermia. He says taking a victim's temperature should be as standard as taking a pulse and blood pressure reading.
A lot of people will lay on the floor for 2 or 3 days and go unnoticed by friends or relatives. And they're not dead, but they're dying. I have to admit, on 2 cases, our crews went to the scene and thought that initially thought both of the people were dead, and examined them and found no pulse and no signs of life. And they were in cold apartments or on cold floors. And once the body was stirred, those people responded and were very much alive when the second crew came through.
They suspect that as many as 25,000 elderly Americans die from occult hypothermia every year. Nobody diagnoses it. How many do we give up on? We shouldn't. Well, here, try this one. He's an auto accident victim. He's 20. He's declared dead. His license has got a donor thing, organ donor thing, so they're going to take out his kidneys. They keep him on a heart-lung machine for 9 hours. They're getting ready to remove the kidneys, and look what happens. The corpse starts coughing.
I'm waiting for an accident victim. Eventually, somebody's going to go in and do some very simple, rapid surgery. In fact, I'm not so sure that a hypothermic victim couldn't have surgery without anesthetic, because essentially they're in such a profound mental state that it's almost like anesthesia anyway. I think at some point in time, some physician's going to pull one of these off, and then once the first case is done, there'll be some more.
There's a tremendous amount now of clinical data to support the cold water near drowning. There's next to nothing to support our contention about people in automobiles. And this is, we're going to have to dig it out and to put it all together. I think it's there.
The theories of Weddick and Smith go beyond what is now medical fact, and it often takes years for medical theories to be proven and accepted. Nemiroff took a chance on proving his theory in 1975 with his resuscitation of Brian Cunningham. As a result, lives are being saved today. Nemiroff's study of cold water drownings and Weddick's and Smith's determination to expand on his research have made medical personnel take a closer look at what is considered death, but what may in fact be life.
The bottom line, the very bottom line is humans are not dead until they're warm and dead.